you first met that person, when you were falling in love and you were going on dates, before kids, before a mortgage, before bills, what did you want out of marriage? So think about it. You can say it out loud if you want. I think it's nice to have a discussion. But just think about it for a second in your head, okay? It's like what you want out of marriage. So my guess is probably this is what you wanted, right? And they lived happily ever after, right? So you had this vision of meeting this person, you fell in love, you had a beautiful life together, you went on these wonderful dates, and then, you know, you got married, you bought this beautiful house, and it was always clean, and it was beautiful, and you had children, your children were beautiful, and your children were perfectly behaved, and you never had to discipline them, they never watched TV, they never even asked for it. You know, you were financially stable, you never had to worry about bills, you loved your job, everything was perfect, right? You lived happily ever after. And I feel like that's what Disney tells us, right? Disney tells us that the prince met the princess and they lived happily ever after, and everything Disney says is true, so it has to be true. But if you fast forward even more to maybe where you are now and you ask yourself, what do I want out of marriage? Your answer might be different. I want to stay married at this point, right? I just want all the perfectness. The reality is, right, it's not perfect. It's not going to be perfect. There's going to be struggles. You're going to go through things with your partner. You're going to argue. You're going to fight. Your kids are going to be screaming at you. You're going to say, why doesn't he talk? Why doesn't she talk less? Like, you're going to have conflict in your marriage, and that's normal. That's okay. So I'm saying all this to say what, right? Like, marriage is not going to be perfect. It's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be conflict-free. And no marriage is conflict-free. And it's not meant to be conflict-free, right? So the goal of marriage is not that you don't have any arguments ever, because it's impossible. And because that doesn't promote growth. I think with every conflict and every situation you have with your partner, you grow from it, you learn from it, you grow from it. And that's really what the goal of marriage, right? Is to learn how to handle the conflict in the correct way. And that's the purpose of this series. The purpose of this series is to say, yes, you're going to have conflict in your marriage, so now how to handle it, what do you do about it? Because there is no conflict-free marriage, as it says up there. There's no such thing, because nobody is perfect. So the objectives of this is not to learn how to never argue. It's not to learn how to have the perfect marriage. It's not how to learn how to be the perfect person or how to fix your spouse, right? That's not the point of this presentation. The point of it is, when you do fight, how do you handle it? So I'm going to go way back. So I think, as Diana mentioned last week, there was a doctor named Dr. John Gottman. And he started his research in the 70s, and he observed couples. He observed how they interacted, and then he tracked their relationship. And from all of this studies and this research that he did, he nailed it down to 4 main things that he said, if couples do these 4 things when they're arguing, it's not going to be good for that couple. So one of them we talked about last week, which was criticism. Today we're going to talk about what's called stonewalling. And then there's 2 more that we'll be talking about, which is defensiveness and contempt. So these 4 themes of negative communication can be really harmful to a marriage when it's done in conflict. And so today we're going to be talking about stonewalling. So what is stonewalling? Does anybody know what stonewalling is? I don't know if there's an Arabic word for it, but... Does anyone want to guess what it is? Stonewalling? Okay, I don't know what that means, but basically it's when one person decides they're not going to communicate anymore. So that person shuts down, basically builds a wall. Exactly. You're building a stone wall. Yeah, it's basically what it sounds like. So what is it when someone in the conversation starts to act like a wall and says, you know what, that's it. I'm not gonna engage. I'm not gonna communicate. I'm gonna shut down. I'm gonna build this wall. Okay, so that's what stonewalling is. Yeah.
It's more of فاكرين مرة فاتت لما اتكلمنا عن النقد المستمر فالبني آدم بيقفل يعني خلاص بقى اللي هو مش متقبل كلمة من الطرف الآخر يعني قفل مشاعره مخه كده قفل من
Yeah, so like one person either, looks away, crosses their arms, says, forget it, I don't want to talk about this anymore, or they just stop responding and walk away. It could look a lot of different ways. And it could lead to a lot of different things. So there's a lot of different ways to stonewall someone. So one way I imagine it is if you and your partner are in a very heated conversation, and one person says, you know what, I can't do this anymore, and they walk away, like literally just walk away, right? So that's one way. It could be avoiding the person from then on. Like it could start as a small argument that you get into, you stop talking, and that's it. And then it goes on for hours. Maybe it goes on for days. Maybe it goes on for weeks. It could look a lot of different ways. So maybe then, from then on, you're going to avoid that person. You're not going to interact with them. If you have kids, maybe you'll communicate about the kids, but that will be it. It'll just be bare minimum. No text message, how's your day going, babe? None of that, right? It's just basic communication just to get through the day. It could be purposely not spending time with that person. So saying, you know what, I'm going out tonight, don't wait up for me. Avoiding them at that time when you guys usually are together, that together time when you even like intimate. So being intimate with your partner. Maybe you're withholding intimacy from your partner. Maybe you're saying, you know, I'm mad at them and I'm not going to be intimate with them. Maybe it leads that other person to sleep in another room for a while, right? So it can look in a lot of different ways. It's not just about verbal communication, because as couples, we're communicating in a lot of different ways. And I always go back to the love languages. So I wrote here withholding their love language, because we all experience and give love in different ways. So I always go back to the love languages. I'm going to withhold my love from them in the way that they like to receive it. So if that's touch, if that's talking, if that's spending time with them, I'm going to withhold that from them, because I'm going to stonewall. I don't want to interact with them, and I don't want to give them that love. I don't want to show them that love in that way. So that's just to say that stonewalling can be a lot of different ways. It's not just about ignoring them. It's about ignoring them on different levels, with all of the emotions, with all of your senses, and with all the different love languages. Do you guys have questions so far about it, or do you have anything to add to it? Okay. So I always say there's three, I don't always say, this is a saying, there's three sides to every story, right? Your side, their side, and then the truth. And then I just put up here, which is usually her side, right? Because the woman's always right. So there's always three sides to every story. So with this, I want to look at what it's like to be that person who's stonewalling, what that person is experiencing, what it's like to be that person getting stonewalled, so the person who's getting ignored, and then what it really all means. So the first one is the person who's stonewalling. Why do you think a person might stonewall? Why do you think a person might do that in an argument? If you do it, why do you do it? Or if your partner does it, why do you think they do it? So it's biological. So when you are in, let's say you are in a heated argument, biologically you might feel like you're under threat. And biologically, when we feel like we're under threat, we go into our survival mode. And that survival mode is fight, flight, or freeze, right? We've all heard those terms before. And so in that moment, when you're in that fight, flight, or freeze, biologically, a lot of things happen to you. First of all, your brain releases a stress hormone. Your rational thinking shuts down, because if you're fighting a tiger, like if you're under threat and you're fighting a tiger, you don't need to be thinking rationally. You need to just survive. You need to be reacting. And so that's what your body is doing. And it's the same type of, even though you're not fighting a tiger, you're arguing with your partner, it's the same type of reaction. It's the same type of feeling that you feel like you're under threat. And so you turn into survival mode. You stop your rational thinking. And then you don't have access to all of those different things like affection, like humor. You can't rationalize things because that part of your brain has shut down and you're just thinking about survival. And so like Mary was saying, you're so overwhelmed with all of these things that you shut down and you can't even interact anymore. So it's kind of like a defense mechanism for that person, and it's their response for feeling under threat. And it's natural. It's what your body is meant to do, right? When you feel under threat, your body is meant to react in a certain way. So that's what that person is doing. And again, we're losing our instincts of problem solving, of showing affection. So like something that could be a fight that could be solved with humor or a joke, hug or whatever, you don't have access to that. You can't even get yourself to do that because you're so overwhelmed with that other emotion that you can't even do that. I think another thing is also avoiding conflict. So some people say, in this moment, I know if I say something, it's going to turn even worse. So I'm just going to shut down and not interact. I'm not going to engage anymore because it's just going to make things worse. I'm going to say something that I'm going to regret. I'm going to say something that's going to trigger the other person. So I'm going to shut down and just not interact anymore to possibly avoid the conflict. Now, I'm not saying that that necessarily is the right thinking, right? So, or maybe it is in that moment, but what happens after is even more important. So not just that initial moment, but what happens after, which we'll talk about in a minute, okay? Anything else you think, any other reasons you think people might stonewall? Or other situations? No. Okay. So as the person getting stonewalled, so on the other side of that wall is somebody who's like, wait a second, we were just fighting and then you just walked away, right? So what does that feel like for that person? What does that mean for that person? So for that person who's getting stonewalled, there might be a lot of emotion there too, right? So that person might be thinking, he doesn't care, or she doesn't care. She doesn't care enough to have this conversation. They're just going to walk away. That means they don't care about our relationship, or they don't think our relationship is worth fighting for because they don't want to continue this conversation. They're just ready to let this go, right? So they don't think that relationship is worth it. Or they might say, you know what, that person hasn't talked to me for 3 days because they're so mad, and they're fine. They're not even affected by it, while I'm so upset about it because, one, we got into a fight, and two, I haven't talked to my partner who I love dearly. I haven't talked to that person or interacted with them in so long that I miss them, and I don't feel like it's affecting that person. So it leads them to believe, okay, they don't love me. They just don't care about me anymore. They're happier when they're not talking to me, or happier when they're not engaging with me. And then I think another thing is that it might make person feel that love is conditional. So again, if you go back to the love languages, let's say your love language is quality time, and that person's not spending quality time with you anymore because they're stonewalling you, like they're in that moment where they're avoiding you for whatever reason. It might lead you to think, okay, it's conditional, like they only love me when I agree with them, or they only love me when I don't share my opinion, or they only love me when we agree about everything, right? Shouldn't be the case. Love is unconditional. Love in marriage is unconditional. It might lead you to believe that that their love is conditional. It's not unconditional as it should be. So I said there's two sides to every story, right? So there's the side of the stonewaller, the side of the one who's being stonewalled. The truth is, when you're in that heightened state of arguing or being in an argument with your partner, it's not going to be fruitful to necessarily keep that conversation going, right? So it's okay. It's okay to have that feeling of, okay, I need to stop engaging, I need to stop. But it's important to interpret it as, I need to take a break, right? So, and it's okay to take a break because, again, the truth is it's not going to be helpful to continue going back and forth when you're both up here and you're not coming to a resolution, you're just going around and around and yelling at each other or whatever that looks like for you and your partner. It's not going to be helpful and it's not going to be fruitful. So it's okay to take a break. So I'm not saying, I'm not saying like if you get into that feeling, keep it going, just keep fighting, like see who wins at the end, like who's still standing. I'm not saying that. I'm saying it's okay to do it, and it's okay to take a break. But the important thing is that when you do take a break, use the break, right? So when you're in that break, you have to access your coping skills. So as adults, we all have whatever we use to cope, whatever we use to get through the day and on a daily life, and we use whatever we need to do to calm down. So whatever that looks like for you, whether that means taking a walk, whether that means taking a shower, whether that means writing everything down. Sometimes I do that when I'm very mad at someone. I just write down everything to get my own thoughts in order so that when I'm arguing with the person, I have all my points in place. I say, well, then you did this, and then this happened. At least I have it down on paper, and I can rationalize it in my own space without that pressure of the other person looking at me and talking back to me and pushing me about other things, and I'm getting emotional, right? So giving yourself that space to take a break and write everything down, or take a walk, take a deep breath, whatever that looks like for you to calm down, it's important to do after that moment. So if stonewalling is your mechanism, is your coping mechanism, and is something that you habitually do to protect yourself, really, right? Make sure you use that time right afterward to calm yourself down. And then the thing that's even more important than that is after you take the break, if you are that person, when you're taking that break, right, that waiting is the hardest part, right? So like, again, could it be 20 minutes? It could be, right? So biologically, yes, it could be 20 minutes for you to cool down and then resume the conversation with your partner. But more likely than not, what happens is it takes longer because then you become stubborn, and then you might become proud, and you say, I'm not going to go back to that person. Yes, I walked away, but they should come to me and say sorry, or they should approach me, right? So you're taking that break, and that other person is waiting for you, and you might not even be realizing it because, you might not have even put that together that that's what's happening. But once you're able to identify that, understanding that that other person is waiting for you, and making sure that you go to that person. So if you are that person that needs the break, making sure you're going back to that person and saying, okay, I needed a break, I'm cool now, and we can continue our conversation. Or you could say, I took a break, and I'm really not ready to talk about this yet. Can we talk about it tomorrow after we've had a good night's sleep? But keeping that communication open with your partner is going to be important, because if you don't, it can lead to a lot of harmful things. So one, when you do go back to that person, it builds trust. So you're saying, I care about you. My love is unconditional. I'm just not in a good space right now, right? So you're building trust with that person, and you're preventing it from becoming a habit. And that way that person knows, okay, that my partner's not stonewalling. My partner needs to cool down. I can identify that. I recognize that, and I respect that. And I'm gonna let my partner have that space. And it prevents it from becoming something larger, right? So something that starts as a fight about dinner, for example, can turn into a big fight, can turn into a stonewall, can turn into 5 days of not talking to each other, right? So it becomes, you turn what we call like a seed problem into like a tree, right? It becomes like a huge issue now. When it didn't, you could have just had that argument to cool down and then resumed your conversation about it once everyone was in a better space and not making it into a bigger issue. And it prevents it also from making assumptions. My partner is not talking to me for several days. It's easy for me to make assumptions about what's going on for that person when I don't know what's going on for that person, right? So that person will say, I need a break, but for me, that person is saying, I don't love you, right? So you're making all these assumptions. It gives space for negative thoughts, which aren't going to be helpful for anybody. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point, actually. The other thing is I think when you're in the middle of it, you can't say, you're stonewalling, right? Because, again, your partner is not going to be able to hear it in that moment. It might make things worse. So I think that's another good point. You need to remember that you have to make sure your partner is not just listening, but like really hearing what you're saying in that moment. And if they're not in that space, it's not going to go anywhere. Even if you identify it in that moment, it's not going to be helpful. You kind of have to wait for the storm to pass, talk about it, about what that was and what that looked like, and process it together to come up with a plan later. Do you guys have questions or any thoughts about this? You want a break? So the last one is how to change, okay? Now that I told you what to do, how do you change yourself? Just kidding. So no one's going to be changing today, okay? We've all been alive for X amount of years, and we've learned these coping mechanisms. And the purpose of this is not to unteach you your coping mechanisms or unteach you what you do when you're in survival mode, right? The purpose of this is to tell you it's okay to be able to recognize it and then also be able to recover from it when it happens in your relationship. So I think just being able to identify it on your own is to see, okay, my partner is going through something, partner needs a break, and I'm okay with that. You're being able to recognize it is huge. 2, you're being able to identify it for your partner, saying, hey, I think this is what's going on for you, when they're going to be important for your relationship. And then being able to recover from it. An example, like Mary said, is coming up with a code word. And I think the funnier the better, because it could break the ice. Fighting and your code word is like circus or clown. Not very funny. But if you think of a funny word, it'll ice, and then you'll start laughing, and then maybe it'll lead to a resolution. Be like, oh, I'm sorry, this was such a silly fight. Keep it from escalating it. So the purpose of this, I think the purpose of this talk and all of the talks about communication is not necessarily to, some of it is to change, maybe, if it's very negative, but the main purpose is to be able to recognize it, identify it, and recover from it, and mediate for later conflict in your marriage. Any other questions or comments? No? Okay. Another thing is just to remember that our differences is really what attracted us to one another in the first place. And I always go back to that. I read it, I think, in something, or I heard it in a sermon. But just to remember that oftentimes we have conflict because we're so different, but remembering that our differences is what made us love each other so much. And so to embrace those differences and remember that it's okay. It's okay that we're different. It's okay that we deal with conflict differently. Like, I find myself to be very confrontational when it comes to fights. Like, I just want to do it right then and there and be done. I don't want it to carry over. But some people might not be like that. Some people might say, you know what, I can't do that right now. It's too threatening for me, and I can't keep going like that. I need to do it in a different way, and I have to be respectful of that. So just remembering that our partners are not the same as us, and that they might process things differently, they might handle things differently, they might deal with argument differently, they might communicate differently, but being able to recognize it is going to be very important for both of you, and being able to recover from it and mediate through it is going to be important too. Do you guys have any questions? You guys want to talk about it a bit more, or about criticism and stonewalling, or what that means, or what a negative communication means in a relationship when there's conflict? Because really the problem with, I think in marriage, it's that conflict resolution that becomes very important, right? Because it's not lack of conflict. There's no such thing as a lack of conflict. It's how we resolve that conflict. And I also think you can apply this not just to marriage. I think you can apply it to parenting, as Diana pointed out last week. You can apply it to like coworkers. You can apply it to friendships. You can apply it to all of your relationships. Really, it's all about communication. And how you resolve conflict in your relationships. Comments, questions, discussion? Translation, anybody have questions about any of the slides or anything that we went over? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's actually a good point, too, because I think sometimes the way I envision stonewalling specifically is in the middle of an argument that someone shuts down, but oftentimes it might not be that obvious. It might be something happened, all of a sudden my partner is different, I don't know what's happening, we didn't have an argument, we didn't have a discussion at all, that person has just shut down, and I have no idea. And I think that is huge, too, to be able to say, okay, what's really happening here? What did I do something? And approaching your partner saying, do you need a break? Talk about what happened. Do you want to talk tomorrow? Do you want to talk do you want to go for a walk by yourself? You know, being able to problem solve with your partner, I think, is really important. Yeah, that's so true.
That's a big part of it too, is like, why am I doing this? Or thinking about your husband or your wife, to say like, I know what his mom is like, or I remember what his dad is like. I think that's why this is what's going on. And then like, it's hard trying to have a conversation.
Yeah, I think not just parents too, but also maybe like your birth order. Like, were you the mediator of the family? Were you the one who took care of everything? Were you the clown? Were you the instigator? Were you the troublemaker? You know, like, what were you? I think you're right, your family of origin. The other thing about stonewalling, though, is I think it's important, especially if you are the one who does it, who like shuts down, is to make sure you're not shutting down and then shoving it under a rug, because that could be really harmful too in your relationship. If you're shutting down and then saying, okay, you know what, whatever, I'm over it, but you're not really over it, that can be really harmful, because I think that can make you resentful of your partner, and then you build things up against your partner and say, well, they did this and this and that. But if your partner isn't aware of it because you shut down and shoved it under a rug, it's not going to be helpful. It's not going to get resolved either. Any other thoughts, guys? Come on. Give me something. It's still very early. If you're the one who does it? So I think being able to say, okay, I see that's what I'm doing is going to be the first step. So being able to say, okay, I can see that I'm the one who's putting up that wall is going to be the first step. And then you need to cool down. Figure out how you're going to cool down and figure out how much time you need. So is it 20 minutes, I'm going to go for a walk and come back, we're going to talk about it, or I need to get a good night's sleep, and then we could talk about it in the morning, whatever it is. But figuring out for yourself how much time you need and what you need to do to calm down. And then I think the very important thing is going back to your partner at the end. Because if you never go back, your partner is still waiting for you. And if you don't go back, your partner might think it's not resolved. So keeping that communication open between you and your partner. Do you feel like that's doable or no? Yeah. Yes. Yeah. But that's why communication, they are different. No. Yeah. They are different. I think that's why you have to communicate and tell each other what's going on. So he might think he's waiting for you, and you might think, I'm so mad, but he needs to come to me and say sorry. Nobody knows what to do, and you're just avoiding each other. And then eventually someone comes and says, I'm sorry, I love you, this is so silly, and then you talk about it, and then it's over. But in between, you wasted, 3-5 days of arguing about something when it wasn't even worth it, So I think that's why communication is so important, to let your partner know, this is what's happening right now, this is what I need, and this is what I plan to do, or this is what I want you to do. Otherwise, they're not going to know, right? What about with your kids? I feel like you guys ever do this with your kids? I do. Sometimes I'm so mad at them about something, and they'll say, do you want to play now, right? Because I'm so angry, but I have to sit back and think about, okay, what is that teaching them, right? So by they're asking them, do you want to play with me? They don't really want to play. They're saying, do you still love me? Right? They're asking, do you still love me, Mom? And I think this is where this is really applicable too, because at times you want to stop engaging so badly, right? Because they can make you crazy. But just remembering that, what's that message, what's that telling them, right? So do whatever you need to cool down, and then just remember that you love your kids unconditionally, even if you're mad at them, it's okay. And they're asking, do you still love me, right? I know. And I think that's okay too. Sometimes, but also it's okay to tell your kids, you know what, Mommy's really upset right now, I need a break. I've told my kids that, I need to cool down, and I'm going to be right back, and they're like, okay. So it's okay. I guess what I'm saying is, it's okay, it's human, right? It's human and it's okay, but it's what you do afterward that's really important, and how you handle it afterward.
So I do think that sometimes, when you go through something with let's say with your kids, you do need your time. And I think for me especially, and everybody's different, but when I need my space, I let them know. This is now my time, my space to deal with what just happened, and we can talk about it later, and I'll reassure them of my love for them.
Yeah.
But when something goes down, they need to know it, and I make them know it.
Mm-hmm.
But on the flip side, I soften it later, and the whole lovey-dovey thing.
Right.
But at the time, I kind of draw a hard line in the sand, so that does not repeat itself.
Yeah, no, and I think that's healthy, because then you're also modeling for them what to do when you're so upset. You're saying, it's okay to take a break, cool down, and then come back. It doesn't change my love, right? So when you're angry, for example, I feel like my kids too, when they become so angry, they're like, this is the worst day ever. They go so extreme. And so you're modeling for them, again, it's okay to be so upset, and it's also okay to take a break and cool down. And that doesn't change anything between us, right? Our relationship is not going to change. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think writing it down is always helpful. And then whether you want to give it to your partner written down, or whether you want to read it to each other, whatever works for you guys. But I agree. I think writing it down is really helpful, because, like you said, it takes the emotion out of it. Because when you're in it, it's not about the fight anymore. You don't even remember what you're fighting about. Now you're just so mad at each other. There's so much emotion. And then pride gets in the way sometimes too. Like, you know, I think sometimes it's really hard to be the first one to go and say sorry. Yes, the emojis. Yeah. 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 But I think, yeah, I don't think there's not space for pride in a relationship, right? Like, there's no space for pride. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter. It's not about pride or stubbornness, right? It's about that love between you and that person.
So I was just gonna say with the kids too, you can use like a word. Like with my own kids, if I yell at them because it happened. I was asked by my little one, Avery, to switch the and then, but we have a word that's called leave. So they would say, instead of later thing, like when we meet people down, instead, do I come later? Or like, so later, the word later, where we know that we need to, that's it, cool down, come back. Within,
Yeah. Yeah.
later is the,
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the most important thing in all of this is that you do come back, right? I think that's the biggest takeaway of this, is that you do come back at the end, because then you're communicating again that love, that unconditional love with whoever you're having that argument with or that conflict with. Anything else? Anything you want to add or ask? Yeah. 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 That's a good question. I think conflict happens at night because people are so exhausted that they don't have any more skills to use. They've used all of their emotions. They've used all of their tolerance. They've used everything. I also find my patience at night is gone. Like, I don't have any patience for anything. And I think even if it can't get resolved that night, communicating that love of saying, I know you're upset. It's okay to be upset. But at the end of the day, right, we still love each other. So if it's between siblings, you know, maybe you can't resolve the whole thing, but say, look, I know you guys are in a fight, but that doesn't change that you guys love each other, and we could talk about it in the morning, right? And I think sometimes kids will go to sleep upset, you know, and I think that might be okay too, because they have to learn that not everything is going to be perfect all the time, right? They have to learn how to deal with that upsetness and that emotion in a healthy way. So helping them understand it's okay to be upset, it's okay to have this feeling. It doesn't feel good, I know, but it's okay, and we can resolve this. Maybe not right now, but we can resolve it, and it doesn't change anything in our family, right? You guys are still siblings. You still love each other. It doesn't change any of that, right? Or, you know, I'm still your mom. I still love you. We'll talk about this in the morning. I don't want this to ruin your night. It's okay. We're going to figure this out in the morning, right? So you're not pushing it off, but you're letting them know it's okay, and we're going to resolve it, just maybe not in this moment because it's not the right time, you know? And I think also addressing, like, you know what, after a good night's sleep, everyone feels better. You can cool down, and we can talk about it in the morning. I feel like a good night's sleep fixes a lot of stuff. And a good meal. Right. 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 Yeah. That's true. Yeah, it has to be age appropriate, definitely. Yeah, because you're right. I think especially as we get older, you're right. Teens space a little bit versus I think the little kids, they're always on you, right? They want touch. They want all of these different ways that you're showing love. So making sure it's age appropriate and it works for them, whatever is working for that child. Yeah. Other questions or comments or discussion points that you want to bring up? So as we continue the series, we'll talk more about the different ways we communicate when we're in that negative space with our partner. And I hope you're thinking about it and thinking about like am I this person or is my partner this person? Because I think identifying it, like I said, is one of the first steps. Being able to say, oh yeah, I see this in my partner, I see this in myself, and then learning how to mediate it between the two. No. Arabuna? Any other points to add? No? Okay. Okay.
I don't know if you, Mary used to have a box about suggestion. It's still in the back. لو في أي topics معينة عايزينها حطوها وفي series جديدة في يعني في أحد الأحباء معانا يعني reading good Christian psychological books and summarizing and stuff. So we're gonna have new series. Hopefully يعني we'll have more stuff coming. But thank you. Should we pray? And أول مرة في حياتنا نقعد نسأل أسئلة يعني every time يعني we're usually running on